now the Sons of Liberty show on the CB Media Network.
Due to the graphic nature of this program, listener discretion is advised.
We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink.
Live from Central Virginia, it's Saturday night!
Now we find ourselves facing a tyranny that has been infused with new blood, and it is rapidly becoming an engorged, hard tyranny. And yes, I know you better-minded listeners picked up on that not-so-subtle metaphor. I used it on purpose because a hard tyranny serves one purpose and one purpose only, to screw its subjects. No force, no attitude, no emotion, no nation, no person can hold any modicum of power, much less utter dominion over a sovereign individual, except through the sanction that is given by that individual.
But for me, leading a worldwide depression.
In doing so, we will honor the vows of our founders, who in the Declaration of Independence said that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This legislation will lead to healthier lives, more liberty to pursue hope and dreams and happiness.
Federal government, yes, can and do most anything in this country.
Just who the hell do you think you people are?
There's your dichotomy, folks. Do you want to be treated like children, or do you want to be treated like adults with brains of your own who can make your own decisions? That's the bottom line between new progressivism, which is really old communism, or conservatism, which is what started this great nation. Which hand are you going to choose?
If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
All right, hello everyone. Sorry about that. Intro got cut a little bit short. Well, anyway, thanks for joining in. I am, of course, your Iron Man of classical liberal thought, Bradley Reese, and I'm joining you on a Sunday night, which is kind of weird. Usually come in on Saturday nights, but last night we had a bit of a late night out with my son. Actually, he's in the all-district chorus here, and we had to go to an event there. He performed marvelously, as always. He's a great singer, and I have no idea where he gets that from. Anyway, so thanks for joining in. I am, of course, broadcasting live tonight, as always, from the semi-palatial satellite studio of the conservative broadcast media here in the great Commonwealth of Virginia, where our motto is Sic Semper Tyrannis, which means thus always to tyrants. And if you've ever seen the logo on the flag of the Commonwealth of Virginia, you will know what thus means, and you will understand why tyrants generally don't survive thus. Anyway, a lot to talk about on the show tonight. First of all, big ups to Unparalleled Height, a great band out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, going to be playing some of their music throughout the show tonight. They are fantastic, and right now they are trying to win a Battle of the Bands competition to get a spot, possibly, on the next Warped Tour, and these guys deserve it. Let me tell you, they're hardworking, and their music is just kick-ass, as you will hear later on in the show. And the Battle of the Bands is sponsored by Ernie Ball Strings, among many others, Vans, etc. And you can vote for Unparalleled Height on the battleofthebands.com website. I tweeted out the link just a few minutes before going live on the show here, so you can check out my Twitter, Bradley S. Reese. That's R-E-E-S, 2 E's in the middle, none on the end. Make sure you spell it right. Otherwise, if you throw that E on the end, you might find somebody else. That's not the way my name is spelled, so make sure you get Bradley S. Reese, 2 E's in the middle, none on the end. And you can find that link there. It's battleofthebands.com, and you can search Unparalleled Height. And again, they are fantastic. You'll hear them a little bit later on in the show. And 3 of their songs actually are going to be played on the show tonight. And the titles of these songs actually sort of inspired the show. There was stuff that I was going to be talking about anyway, and these song titles just fit right in. So first of all, I want to talk about, of course, the filibuster, a little over 12 hours that Rand Paul engaged in on the Senate floor last Wednesday. And I've got to tell you, he was bringing attention to the whole issue of drone strikes, not just on American citizens on American soil, but also on Americans overseas as well. And he brought up the point about Anwar al-Awlaki, a United States citizen who, for all intents and purposes, renounced his U.S. citizenship to join up with Al-Qaeda in spreading propaganda to the masses and encouraging attacks on the United States. Well, this is, obviously a huge issue. We don't want American citizens of all people encouraging attacks on America by any means. So a drone strike to take him out, maybe not the best idea in the world, especially if he had strong ties to Al-Qaeda. Probably capturing him and maybe undergoing a bit of interrogation might have been a better route to go to find out what he knew about any possible future attacks that were in the works. But nonetheless, being an American citizen at that point, essentially renouncing your American citizenship and encouraging attacks on our country, that is warrant to be taken out. Quite frankly. So I have no problem with that. But the issue that Rand Paul brought up is a very important one. We have in our Bill of Rights a 4th and 5th Amendment. These amendments give you the right, as an American citizen under the U.S. Constitution, to face your accuser, to be brought into a court of law and given due process of law to be tried and convicted or acquitted on whatever charges you have been brought up on. This process, this due process under our Constitution that is guaranteed to every American citizen, did not take place in the case of Anwar al-Awlaki's son. Anwar al-Awlaki's son was 16 years old. He was in Yemen looking for his father, and about 3 weeks after his father was taken out by a drone strike, al-Awlaki's son happened to be taken out by a drone strike as well, in a crowd of at least 20 other people, burned to a crisp by this drone strike while at a sidewalk cafe in Yemen. Now, al-Awlaki's son, is a U.S. citizen as well. No due process was given, no warning was given, no attempts to capture him were given, and by the way, there is no indication whatsoever that this child was involved with Al-Qaeda, especially in planning attacks against the United States. So this is very troubling, and what is even more troubling, a fact that Rand Paul brought up on the Senate floor, is the fact that when asked about the death of Anwar al-Awlaki's son through a drone strike, a spokesman for the administration said he would essentially, this is not an exact quote, but essentially this is what he said. He would have been okay if he had chosen better parents. Now, pardon me, but you don't choose your parents. And whatever the actions of your parents might be, they do not automatically condemn that parent's child. Especially a 16-year-old boy who is a U.S. citizen entitled to all of the protections of our Constitution and our laws because he happens to be overseas. Sorry, that's not good enough. The fact that he happened to be in Yemen is not enough of an excuse to send a drone and drop a missile on this child. This is America. We do not do these kinds of things, or we're not supposed to do these kinds of things. But it has happened. Now, Rand Paul brought up in his filibuster the fact that he had asked the Obama administration, and for that matter, he brought up the fact that he opposed a lot of the things that happened under the Bush administration as well. To his credit, as well he should have, to be quite honest. There were things that happened under the Bush administration that are not in keeping with American ideals either. I wrote a pretty lengthy piece on this a while back over at the Trenches, thetrenches.us, and it was called Another Man's Treasure, and I was trying to make the case that, if I can find it here real quick, I was trying to make the case that, look, we understand that there is terrorism that takes place around the world. We get that. But I was trying to make the case with idioms and saws and maxims that we go by on a daily basis, things that are just commonplace in the American lexicon. Things like one man's trash is another man's treasure. And I tried to go through and make the case that one man's trash can actually be another man's treasure, and I think I did a pretty good job explaining that. But I went on to expose how this maxim has been bastardized a little bit in regards to terrorism as well. And you may have heard the idiom that has come into vogue, I suppose, over the last especially 15 years. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And I made the case that, well, not really, because terrorism has a pretty vague and malleable definition. We think of Al-Aqsa, Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf, Hamas, Hezbollah, all these different groups, Islamic terror groups, as terrorists. But we have to take into account that terrorism is not simply confined to the Islamic world. If we're going to use the definition that, well, terrorism is seeking to instill terror. Well, then wouldn't the Jacobins or the Bolsheviks or the Nazis or the Stern Gang or Haganah or Irgun or the Red Hand or the IRA, wouldn't we have to include them as terrorists as well? What's the line of demarcation? It doesn't matter if the method is blades, bullets, bombs, or Zyklon B. If the desired effect is to terrorize, is that sufficient justification to label a group terrorists rather than freedom fighters? And if so, if the desired effect is to terrorize, and that is enough to label someone a terrorist, then wouldn't we have to put the Continental Army of the United States during the Revolutionary War in that same category of terrorists? You see, because the rebel colonists, under orders from General Washington, burnt down stockades that held British food rations. They utilized snipers to intentionally target British officers. They conducted sneak attacks hiding in trees to mimic the tactics of Indian tribes, which, by the way, led to severe British retaliation against those Indians. They also... This was the Continental Army now during the Revolutionary War. They also poisoned water supplies and livestock that the English troops were subsisting on. Are these not the tactics of terrorists? Well, subjectively, the answer is a resounding yes, but we'll revisit this in a few minutes. We've established a clear criteria for labeling a group terrorists, haven't we? Well, hardly. The international community can't even agree to a hard and fast rule on that point, and our own criteria for designation are largely arbitrary. So that being the case, isn't it safe to conclude that tactics alone are not enough of a benchmark to differentiate between terrorist and freedom fighter? Shouldn't we also take into account motives and stated end goals? Well, for the sake of clarity, let's explore that path. It can be debated as to whether the end goal of Islamic terrorist organizations is to reestablish an Ottoman-style caliphate, or simply to retain relative autonomy as much as is possible in a theocratic regime, that is, in the affairs of their disparate countries. The evidence I've seen inclines me to believe the former, but opinions vary. By contrast, most accounts say that the Tamil Tigers sought to gain and control an independent territory to be ruled by a government of their choosing. Likewise with the IRA, Haganah, Irgun, Lehigh, Red Hand, the PLO, the Jacobins, the Bolsheviks, and numerous other current or defeated militant groups. But at what cost? Terrorism, no matter its forms and regardless of a concrete definition, takes a large toll on the lives of combatants and innocents alike. Ultimately and demonstrably, it accomplishes very little in the way of achieving stated end goals. So, since we cannot establish an objective definition of terrorist, let's look to the other end, freedom fighter. Can we establish a definition of freedom fighter? Well, the second word there is not the least bit obscure. A fighter is quite simply one who fights. Whether the attendant fight itself is for a person, a place, a thing, or an idea, or against any of the above for that matter, the description of the parties involved remains the same, fighters. What then is freedom? Well, here we enter some pretty problematic territory. As is the case with myriad words that entail concepts, freedom has traveled over some rather treacherous etymological terrain since the dawn of the progressive era. Once synonymous with the concept of individual liberty as informed by natural law, the word freedom is now understood in such trite terms as to be applied to cell phone plans. In modern parlance, you could rightly deem yourself a freedom fighter if you spend an hour on the phone with customer service quibbling over the early termination fee you may incur upon deciding to switch carriers. But if you apply our idiom to that scenario, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, well, the result is pretty straightforward. If you call to negotiate the cancellation fee, you cannot properly be called a terrorist. Likewise, if you plant a bomb in the cell service provider's headquarters, you cannot properly be called a freedom fighter. In both cases, the motive, the fee, and the end goal, avoiding all or part of said fee and switching providers, are identical. The only substantive difference is one of tactics. But with the other terrorist groups that we've already talked about, the distinction is actually unclear. The British deemed Irgun, Haganah, and the IRA terrorists. Zionists and Irish nationalists, respectively, labeled the same groups as freedom fighters and praised them. But the tactics were identical from either vantage point. So does it all boil down to a matter of perspective rather than motives, tactics, or goals? Enemies see terrorists where peers see patriots. After all, that holds true with every other group that we've mentioned so far, doesn't it? Well, it does, except for one glaring exception. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, a bit of context as to the proliferation of terrorist groups in recent history. At the turn of the 20th century, Theodore Roosevelt reasserted the Monroe Doctrine, albeit a somewhat bastardized version. Setting up, propping up, and toppling foreign regimes all but replaced baseball as our national pastime for the next century. The United States, whether through direct military action or covert intelligence operations, has intervened in and disrupted the governmental affairs of Afghanistan, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Brunei, Cambodia, Chile, China, Congo, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Egypt, El Salvador, Ethiopia, Fiji, Greece, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Indonesia, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Jordan, Liberia, Libya, Morocco, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Panama, Paraguay, Philippines, Portugal, Rhodesia, Saudi Arabia, Spain, South Africa, Syria, Taiwan, Turkey, Uganda, Vietnam, Zaire, and yes, even Zimbabwe. That list is only partial, but it quite literally extends from A to Z, well, except for the letters X and Y. And I'm sure there are some countries out there, or former countries, that start with X or Y that we've interfered in as well. What's more, that was only half of the 20th century, roughly since the end of World War II. And that practice of intervening in and disrupting the governmental affairs of foreign countries continues. It could be argued factually that military, monetary, or moral support from the United States has led to much less peace in the world at large, rather than more. But was this always the case? Absolutely not. This era of military adventurism, nation-building, and democracy projects was ushered in, carried out, and largely continued by progressives in both major political parties. What would the founders have said about our 20th century foreign policy? Nothing, because they would swallow their damn tongues in shock, horror, and outrage. You see, despite the tactics of the Continental Army, which could reasonably be described as terroristic, as previously pointed out, our founders had a stated end goal that differs greatly from that of any terrorist or freedom fighter group before, or especially since. It was embodied in the first two paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. It utterly rejected the divine right of kings and force-based governmental structures that had been the way of the entire world since the beginning of human civilization. And, largely, those force-based governmental structures still are the way of the entire world. By acknowledging unalienable rights inherent in all human beings regardless of political favor or arbitrary class distinction, they explicitly and emphatically stood athwart the entire march of history. This is the true meaning of American exceptionalism, whether or not that term was coined by Karl Marx as a pejorative. These revolutionaries, tactics during the war notwithstanding, were spurred on by motives and clearly stated end goals, which were both based upon an entirely moral idea: human dignity, which demands the subjugation of the whole of government to individual liberty. As Ayn Rand dubbed it, the subordination of might to right. Only America, up to that point in history, had a rightful claim to this moral high ground, because only a civil society can lay that claim. The moral high ground they stood on, and the civil society they sought and fought to establish, can be summed up by two stories from our pre-constitutional days. Strangely enough, from our modern perspective, the two key players in these moral illustrations were lawyers. Yes, that was sarcasm. Calm down. One of these cases is fairly well known, and it followed on the heels of the Boston Massacre. A handful of British soldiers were accused of killing innocent colonists in cold blood. John Adams, the cousin of infamous Sons of Liberty co-founder Samuel Adams, took up their defense. John realized that with revolution brewing, British soldiers had little chance of receiving a fair trial at the hands of an American judge and jury. He further reasoned that the rule of law was paramount, and without a vigorous defense being made, these troops would be dispatched quickly, taking with them any claim to a righteous cause that the revolutionaries might assert. Likewise, after the war, Alexander Hamilton defended Tories and British loyalists in court from lawsuits brought by colonists. He too recognized that a civil society demands due process, holding the rule of law to the highest standard possible so that justice would be done. Can you imagine any of the other groups that I've listed, whether terrorists or freedom fighters, can you imagine any of them spending their time or energy to defend their sworn enemies in a court of law? The answer to that question, at least, is obvious. But these founders, along with the rest, would be aghast at the kangaroo courts and tin horn tribunals which plague most of the globe today. Indeed, one of the long train of abuses that was listed meticulously in the Declaration of Independence was that King George III had removed colonists to other British territories to stand trial for trumped-up crimes against the Crown. George Washington, no stranger to war and not one to shrink from any battle, devoted a majority of his farewell address to admonishing future generations against foreign entanglements and favored nation designations. Why was that? Because he and his generation knew, from the study of philosophy, history, and human nature, that the only foreign and domestic policy entirely consistent with individual liberty is one of non-intervention. This is what federalism entails, which is why it was codified in the Constitution. America was meant to be a beacon of liberty, not a flamethrower for democracy. Liberty spreads when other societies see it in action, consistently, and choose to emulate it. Perhaps one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century is the fact that just when the rest of the civilized world was beginning to pay attention to our prosperity and strength, and starting to warm to the idea of establishing the concept of liberty in their own nations, the progressives here at home were establishing their own power base on the notion that individual liberty was a losing proposition. By seeking to emulate the rule by brute force, faction, and fiat that blanketed the rest of the world, the progressives squandered for generations any chance for liberty to flourish domestically, much less bloom abroad. Subsequently, I would argue, America as a whole abdicated the moral high ground we alone could rightly claim, and we've seen and felt the deleterious effects of bureaucratic, fiscal, and foreign expansionism ever since. Establishing liberty and a civil society, or even its mentally impaired distant cousin democracy, by force is a contradiction in terms. How far we have fallen to not see the folly in attempting to bring such an oxymoronic concept into reality. Our founders, framers, and growing numbers of our contemporaries realize a simple truth, and will not rest until it is once again an axiomatic one. Liberty is the maximum absence of coercion and initiated force. domestically, monetarily, and in our dealings with the rest of the world. Learn it, love it, and for the sake of restoring some semblance of peace in the world, live it. Now, the main points there that I've just gone over were laid out on the trenches back in December of 2012. And it really did me good to listen to Rand Paul's filibuster and hear the same case being made on a national stage, and so many people all over Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere on the internet praising Rand Paul for taking this stand to ensure due process for Americans, to ensure that we didn't have an administration, an executive branch in Washington, D.C. that would take it upon themselves to execute American citizens on American soil and deny them their constitutional rights. And because of Rand Paul's filibuster, the neoconservatives are paranoid. The neoconservatives are off their nut. John McCain and Lindsey Graham had to come out immediately and try to downplay this as political grandstanding or trying to play to libertarian college kids and all this nonsense, proving yet again how out of touch the old guard Republican establishment is with the American people at large. There were members of Code Pink at the hearing where Ted Cruz was questioning Eric Holder about whether or not these drone strikes could take place to take out American citizens on American soil, and Ted Cruz even remarked that Code Pink was the loudest in supporting what Cruz was doing in asking these questions. We've had 60-plus years of repressive tolerance dogma brought here to America by Herbert Marcuse from the Frankfurt School in Germany. We've had almost 60 years of indoctrination by the neoconservatives, Irving Kristol, and to some extent William F. Buckley, who had a chance to nip neoconservatism in the bud and did not. So we've had that indoctrination going on. Almost 60 years of being pushed from the left and from the so-called right with neoconservatism, pushing us that if we don't accept their ideology, if we don't accept their perpetual war, if we don't accept the notion of democracy projects and the military-industrial state and statism in general, then there's something wrong with us. On top of that, 120 years of progressive indoctrination, which I've already talked about numerous times on this show, 120 years of progressives twisting the language. We have to remember, Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, a Republican and a Democrat, but progressives both, brought us the new Monroe Doctrine from Teddy Roosevelt and World War I from Woodrow Wilson, and the League of Nations that he promoted incessantly. Democracy projects around the world were brought to us by a Republican and a Democrat at the turn of the 20th century. How interesting is it that Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s rejected entry into the League of Nations 3 different times, and when Republicans today, who are not necessarily neoconservatives, when they talk about the greatest presidents in American history, they talk about Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln, skipping right over Calvin Coolidge. How interesting is that? It's not coincidental. And finally, before we head into the break, I need to make one final point, because everything that I've talked about so far in the show tonight leads up to this song by Unparalleled Height. And again, this is not to say that the band endorses anything that I'm saying here. I have no idea if they do or not, but regardless, I simply like their music and I'm going to play it on this show. They are not by any means endorsing what I'm saying here. But one final point leading up to this song. I brought you a couple of weeks ago on the show the story of Joshua Trevino, a quote-unquote conservative, a son of Texas, who has spent the last year subjecting Brooks Bain and everyone on the Trenches team to this accusation of being anti-Semites. For what reason? Well, because there was an article written by Brooks Bain about Sandra Fluke when she got up and gave her testimony about birth control, etc., in front of Congress. Brooks Bain did some research and wrote this article about Sandra Fluke and the question that perhaps her appearance in front of Congress was not quite a coincidence, that perhaps there was some back-channel dealings with the White House to bring this 30-some-year-old activist in front of Congress. Why? Well, because her boyfriend is Adam Mutterpearl, and his family, the Mutterpearl family, goes way back with some high-up members of the Obama administration and the Democrat Party in general. Very interesting. Well, in this article, Brooks also pointed out the fact that the Mutterpearl family is steeped in a particular brand of socialism, a particular brand of European socialist dogma, a particular paradigm that happens to be mostly inhabited by Jews. You know, Milton Friedman has talked about this. Mark Levin has talked about this. The fact that there are certain segments of Jewish society that lean socialist. This is what Brooks was pointing out. And because of even bringing it up, Joshua Trevino has painted everyone that has anything to do with Brooks Bain or the Trenches as anti-Semites. Well, as I brought you a couple of weeks ago, Joshua Trevino had a 3-year contract with the government of Malaysia to bring conservative writers into large publications to write stories on behalf of the Malaysian government and against a man who was opposing the Malaysian leadership in an election. Well, the Malaysian government has been involved in all kinds of anti-Semitic actions, actual anti-Semitism, to the point of being called a prime example of anti-Semitism without Jews. There are people that have been excluded. Let's see, the New York Philharmonic was excluded from Malaysia because they refused to remove from their performance one song that was written by a Jew. That's how bad Malaysia's actual anti-Semitism is. And here's this guy, Trevino, taking almost $400,000 over a 3-year period from the Malaysian government that engages in those kind of anti-Semitic practices, labeling Brooks Bain an anti-Semite for pointing out socialist connections among some Jews. Very, very interesting. Why do these things take place? Why do John McCain and Lindsey Graham come out and call Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Mike Lee wacko birds? Oh, and Justin Amash, too. Can't forget him. Why do they come out and call them wacko birds? Because, folks, the neocon ideology, the neoconservative democracy project, America has to be a flamethrower for democracy rather than the beacon of liberty it was supposed to be. That ideology, that paradigm is being shattered. That 60-plus years of indoctrination that the neoconservatives have tried to instill in the American people was almost single-handedly shaken up by Rand Paul in 12 hours on the Senate floor. The neoconservatives are losing their grip on the argument. They're losing control of the narrative. The American people, referencing the Unparalleled Height song coming up here in a minute, the American people are breaking the chain.
This is Aiden, and my daddy is right. Back after these messages on the Sons of Liberty show, right here on Conservative Broadcast Media.
Oh, Joe, I'm from the flow. I said, stop, wait a minute now, hold up. He come around to hunt you down. What it is, I'm talking about it. Who got the fire? 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 Leaving from the Put me on.
I always loved watching the kids play basketball. I still do, even though things have changed. It's funny, they can't find jobs to get their career started. And I can't afford to retire. And now we're all living together again. I supported President Obama because he spoke so beautifully. He promised change, but things changed for the worse. Obama started spending like our credit cards have no limit. His healthcare law made health insurance even more expensive. We've had stimulus and bailouts. Obama added almost $16,000 in debt for every American. How will my kids pay that off when they can't even find jobs? Now Obama wants more spending and taxes. That won't fix things. I had so many hopes. Cutting taxes and debt and creating jobs. That's the change we need. Tell President Obama to cut the job-killing debt and support the New Majority Agenda at newmajorityagenda.org.
From Iraq and Afghanistan, our brave warriors are coming home, wounded. Some with wounds you can see, some with wounds you can't see. Wounded Warrior Project was created to support our men and women coming off the battlefield. Please help carry these warriors the rest of the way home. Get involved at woundedwarriorproject.org.
What's up, come on? It feels so hard to break away, and I can only feel the pain. I'm breaking the myself straying from my belief.
Show. Listen back.
Alright, and welcome back to the Sons of Liberty show here on the conservative broadcast media right here on Spreaker.com. And I hope you enjoyed the music there from Unparalleled Height. And again, if you liked what you heard, and there's going to be a couple more songs here in the course of the show, go to battleofthebands.com, look for Unparalleled Height, and vote for them. They might have a chance to be on the next Warped Tour, and let me tell you, these guys deserve it. Some awesome music there. You can also find them on iTunes and Reverb Nation. Just look for Unparalleled Height. A great band, great guys, and I hope to actually interview them on the show here before too terribly long. Anyway, so before the break I was talking about the neoconservative and progressive paradigm, both that have been plaguing our nation throughout the, well, in the case of the progressives, throughout the entire 20th century, and in the case of the neoconservatives and the repressive tolerance Marcuse adherents from the Frankfurt School of the latter half of the 20th century. But make no mistake, folks, the Marcusians, the Keynesian, the believers in Keynesian economics, the progressives, and the neoconservatives all foment perpetual war and intervention and democracy projects around the world, rather than allowing America to be the beacon of liberty that it was always destined to be, the moral high ground that we have abdicated by giving up the beacon of liberty moniker and instead trying to turn America and America's might and prosperity into a flamethrower of democracy. We have seen that it does not work. We have seen that it causes more problems than it actually solves. And we have seen, moreover, the blowback. Yes, blowback. The CIA has talked about blowback. The 9/11 Commission has talked about blowback. And this is not by any means to jump on the Ron Paul bandwagon of saying, well, Lady Liberty deserved it on 9/11 because she hiked up her skirt a little bit too much. No, but the fact does remain that what we have done to our nation in the realm of foreign policy and in the realm of the modern bureaucratic welfare state of 164,000 pages of federal regulations that every business in the country must comply with, of billions of dollars a year poured down the rabbit hole of placing Americans into a dependency cycle, of what we have done around the world with foreign aid, military intervention, and black book operations by the CIA, placing other nations in a dependency cycle as well, based on our money. You know, it's funny, the people that talk about opposing the welfare state here at home seem to have absolutely no problem with imposing welfare statism on the rest of the world through our bankroll. If your opposition to welfare statism stops at the water's edge, you are not a friend to America, period. Anyway, so I was talking before the break about those chains placed around the minds of Americans by this indoctrination are being broken. This filibuster by Rand Paul was just the first step. Be patient. But we have seen, just with one man standing up and raising these questions about civil liberties, due process, and our Constitution, just this one man standing up for a little over 12 hours, drawing in national attention and drawing in various groups that may not agree on very much, but yet they joined in this cause. And if they joined in this cause, then the foot is in the door. The foot is in the door. They are opening up their minds to perhaps further education in the realm of federalism, in the realm of what our founding philosophy actually is, and what America was supposed to be. So those chains are being broken, and it is a good thing. Now, what is the next step? The next step is bridging the gap. This piece was written by Foolish Reporter, one of our compatriots over at thetrenches.us, and I will read the piece that this refers to in a few moments. But the picture on the piece, the title picture, if you go over to thetrenches.us and look for Bridging the Gap, the picture is one of a somewhat cloudy sky, and the caption says, "The future is ours to create." And indeed it is. And at the beginning of the post, there are logos for the Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, and Anonymous. Now, you wouldn't think that those groups would have much in common, but wait for it. As Foolish Reporter writes here, one of the top trending pastes on the site pastebin.com for the last 48 hours, and this was written on February 27th. One of the top trending pastes on the site pastebin.com for the last 48 hours has been one called "We the People," penned by myself and inspired by a friend who's deeply identified with Anonymous. It's really a simple plea to anyone that will listen, that we, the people, need to come together at this time more than ever. I've shared it a fair amount in the last day and a half, as has my friend. While on my side of things, the post hasn't seemed to generate nearly as much conversation as I had anticipated, it certainly has for my friend. Many on his side, who are also affiliated with Anonymous, have found what we presented in that simple post on Pastebin to be a worthwhile idea. Others, unfortunately, have expressed contempt and derided my friend for even suggesting such a thing, and that's okay. Foolish Reporter goes on, "This is just the first step in what will likely be a long process, but I'd say the reaction he's received, coupled with the fact that nearly 2,000 people have viewed the post since it was put online, are probably a good indication that the idea of right and left uniting together is an idea whose time has come. We all know it's broken. We all know those we've chosen to fix it seem completely uninterested in doing so. We also know that many of the media, old and new, have a vested interest in keeping the divide as wide as ever." Something really interesting, to me at least, was a tweet I received in reply to one of the times I posted the paste to my Twitter in the last 24 hours. It was from a profile obviously aligned with Anonymous, but it was spreading awareness of what they termed OPELE, or Operation Everybody Love Everybody. And with it was this pastebin. A short excerpt from it. "Amerisec believes that everybody should love everybody. This op evolved organically out of a conversation between several of our members. We are deeply aware of the fact that too often people are sad, lonely, or in need of assistance from their community. To address this issue, we plan to dedicate a minimum of 1 day per month in which all Amerisec Anons are showing their love for others. This can be done in countless ways, such as cleaning up a park or other public space, volunteering at a soup kitchen, planting a garden, repairing a play area for a school, gathering toiletries for a homeless or battered women's shelter, or simply hugging people on the sidewalk. There have been similar service-based ops in the past, and Occupy Sandy is still in need of support. We encourage you to reach out to existing Anon ops or Occupy movements if they are in your vicinity. Anon solidarity equals everybody love everybody. The most important thing here is that Anons are showing their love, and everybody is loving everybody. End quote. Now back to Foolish Reporter. Sounds like something you'd expect conservatives and the religious right to be preaching, doesn't it? Work at the local level, truly help those who need it, and try to be a force of positive change in other people's lives. The commonalities are greater than the differences, and if we can rally around those things we all share alike, it certainly seems like we'd be capable of finally fixing some of the problems we find ourselves still struggling with on a daily basis. I think we're up to it. Do you? And thus endeth Foolish Reporter's piece. Now, there are a few comments here, but pardon me. Let me do a gratuitous whistle wetting break here. Alright, I think that's a little bit better. Alright, well, we'll just have to roll with it. There's a frog somewhere in my throat, and it doesn't want to get out, looks like. Let me see real quick. Well, let me try to get my throat cleared. I will run an ad real quickly here while I'm waiting, or while you're waiting for me to get my throat cleared. Be right back.
Feeling lonely this holiday season? Looking for little human interaction? Do you want to feel contact in certain special places?
Then why not go through security at an airport?
The TSA.
TSA agents are ready and standing by to give you a little something extra to feel thankful about this holiday season.
The TSA.
What are you waiting for? I want to check under your testicles.
Spending time with a TSA agent couldn't be easier. Simply book a flight departing from any American airport. When selected for a full body scanner, say no. You'll be pulled aside by a TSA agent, and that's when the fun begins. And you never know who your agent will be.
It could be me. Or me. Or even me.
But it's probably gonna be us. Take off your damn shoes.
The TSA. It's our business to touch yours.
Welcome to the Bureau of Womanhood Conformity. Independent thoughts are considered subversive because all must agree with our leader.
When it comes to women, preventative care should include coverage of contraceptive services such as birth control.
You see, if you don't believe government should pay for your birth control, you're not a real woman. Womanhood denied. If you refuse to accept that pregnancy is a punishment, you're denied as well.
I don't want them punished with a baby.
If you don't believe that abortions should be allowed for any reason, if you don't believe in aborting a child for being the wrong gender, and if you don't believe that stay-at-home mothers aren't real workers, You are not a real conformed woman.
His wife has actually never worked a day in her life. His wife has actually never worked a day in her life.
Finally, for your safety, if you oppose mandatory government health care, you will die.
They will be voting to say that women can die on the floor.
These standards and regulations were formed after our glorious victory in the war on women. Thank you for your cooperation and your conformity.
Now back to the Sons of Liberty show on the CB Media Network. We refuse to lower our standards, so up yours.
Okay, bend over.
Can't give me a pause! 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 No, you can't!
Ooh, alrighty then. I am back here, and voice is a little bit less shaky. It was kind of kind of weird, but anyway, let me see, what was I looking for on my switchboard? There we are. Okay. Now, anyway, so I read you the little piece from Foolish Reporter there, Bridging the Gap, and I'd like to just reading through some of the comments here, so let me see. Alright, now I'm going to get into the actual paste bin, We the People, that Foolish Reporter posted, that has now been viewed 6,654 times, and it's linked in the piece Bridging the Gap over at thetrenches.us, so you can go and read it yourself as well if you so choose. So here we go. Paste bin, We the People. For anyone who's been paying attention to American politics in the last few years, one thing is abundantly clear. The discontent at our political class, our government, and their enablers is universal. From the Tea Party to Occupy Wall Street and everything in between, it's easy to see that so much is badly broken, and that those tasked with trying to fix it don't really seem to give a damn. Even at the grassroots level, those who have appointed themselves leaders, or those who have risen up through the ranks to be perceived as leaders, don't seem terribly interested in truly finding a way to bridge the gap between left and right, so we can all work toward a common goal of a better present and future. From bloggers to talking heads on TV, to professional activists, we should remember at all times that they too have a deeply vested interest in keeping this false paradigm of left versus right going. Money, prestige, and power have definitely infected the ranks of grassroots activism on the right, and although I don't follow the left nearly as much, I imagine the same dynamic might exist there too. But you see, the opportunity for left and right to come together exists at every moment of every day. In my own experience, I've had friends who identify with Anonymous, friends who identify with the Tea Party, and friends who identify with conservatism, all be able to coexist and actually get each other to laugh and to think. So the question becomes, how do we relearn how to truly become we the people? The thought of movements associated with the right and left unifying together at the grassroots level, away from political control, is probably one that terrifies all those invested in our false paradigm. From the politicians to the old media to the new media, so many benefit from keeping us separated, from keeping us angry and fearful of each other, of keeping each other at each other's throats. Have no doubt that if we can make this work, we will be attacked relentlessly. But so be it. If it were possible, for just the briefest moment in time, for the many to come together and throw off the chains and the false paradigm that's been foisted on us, something amazing might happen, no? If this idea were to truly take off, it seems the time is right now. discontent for all parts of the political parties and their sycophantic whores is everywhere we look. There's no election to muddy our concentration on this thought of unifying. We can truly seize the agency of our own lives, right here, right now, and try to save this country before it goes up in flames. If something like this were to take off, there's no doubt that it will be painful, awkward, and probably so daunting as to make many of us want to quit before it ever gets started. But something worthwhile like this, an effort to get we the people together and out in the streets, out in our communities, out into the world, is going to be painful, hard, and frustrating. I think it's worth it. What do you think? And here's the thing, folks. I have been talking about things along these lines for a long time, and I know a lot of others have as well. This is a concept that is daunting. This is a concept that will have many people upset, afraid, and on the attack. The false paradigm, or the false dichotomy of left and right, has been fomented and perpetuated for so long in this country. There are so many with a vested interest. There are so many with a stake in it, whether it be money, power, influence, whatever their personal gain from this dichotomy is. They will do anything to protect it. And that is why I think it was truly an amazing thing for Ted Cruz to come out during Rand Paul's filibuster. Now, I know Ted Cruz has some there are some things that he stands for and promotes that I have some problems with. But this in particular, I think he deserves high praise for, because he came out during Rand Paul's filibuster and actually gave a shout out to Code Pink for being present in the gallery during his questioning of Eric Holder last Wednesday. And he praised Code Pink for being very vocal in their support of his line of questioning to Eric Holder. Now that's a good thing. Rand Paul, during his filibuster, read articles from the Huffington Post and Glenn Greenwald and Wired Magazine and The Atlantic. These are not bastions of conservatism. You know, these are not Tea Party friendly organizations. And yet Rand Paul, a Tea Party candidate, was reading the quotes from these people's articles. Here's the thing. I think these particular articles from these particular venues, relevant to the topic that Rand Paul was talking about, I think these articles by these people were used on purpose and to make a larger point. That although we may agree on economic policy, we may disagree vehemently on economic policy, we may disagree vehemently on other political issues that confront us day to day. If we can stand together, left, right, and indifferent, stand together on the notion of due process, stand together on the notion of our Bill of Rights and the protections that it affords American citizens, all American citizens, whether suspected of terrorist actions or not. If we can stand together on that, then again, the foot is in the door to perhaps bring them around to the founders' way of thinking, bring them around to other constitutional principles, such as limited government. Because let's face it, folks, the bigger the government is, the more arbitrary their actions are, and the less we can influence them. Bridging the gap is worthwhile. If Code Pink will stand firm with us against drone strikes on American citizens on American soil, if Occupy Wall Street will stand with us in opposition to crony corporatism, which is a bastardization of what capitalism was supposed to be, if we can find common ground with people like Glenn Greenwald or David Swanson on matters of foreign policy and on matters of civil liberties and due process, if we can find common ground on these issues, then this little nonsense here from Nancy Pelosi a couple of years ago can be knocked down.
Another way I would say it is to my Republican friends, take back your party, so that it doesn't matter so much who wins the election, because we have shared values about, again, the education of our children, the growth of our economy, how we defend our country, have security and civil liberties, how we respect our seniors. Because there's so many things at risk right now, and perhaps on another question I'll go into them if you want, but the fact is that elections shouldn't matter as much as they do. It should be someplace on the spectrum where we respect each other's views and all the rest. But if it comes to a place where there doesn't seem to be shared values, then that can be problematic for the country, as I think you can see right now.
Now, the reason I say that that should be knocked down is because there is a danger, folks, and it's represented by that statement from Nancy Pelosi. She's not calling for bridging the gap. She's not calling for coming together as we the people and bringing the left and right paradigm, or the dichotomy of left and right, together. She's not talking about actually finding common ground. She's talking about having things the way that they have been. Think about it this way, folks. There have been, since 1924, there have been exactly 2 Republican nominees for president who did not share the democracy project, America as a flamethrower of democracy, and a nation where we must at least perpetuate, if not expand, a welfare state here at home as well. There have only been 2 nominees in the Republican Party for president that did not share that view. And both of them, since 1924 now, going on 90 years, there have only been 2 that were able to get the GOP nomination for president. One of them didn't get elected, one of them did. I'm talking about Goldwater and Reagan. Both of them had to fight tooth and nail against the Republican establishment to secure those nominations. Why is that? Because they believed in what our founders believed in. The foreign policy of our founders, the domestic policy of our founders, and the economic policy of our founders, all 3 of which are enshrined in the Constitution and the Federalist Papers. Why is that? Because for that long, 90 years, the GOP establishment has had the same mindset on domestic affairs, economic policy, and foreign affairs as the Democrats and progressives. That is what Pelosi was talking about right there. That elections shouldn't matter so much, because no matter who gets elected, they will agree with that worldview. Again, those chains are being broken. That worldview is being recognized for the evil that it is. Our founding philosophy is making a comeback. There are more and more people waking up and taking the red pill every single day that see that the left-right dichotomy, this paradigm that's been foisted upon us, that we have to have a knee-jerk, visceral hate reaction to anything coming from the other side. This has been fomented by the old media and the new media. The common ground that we seek to find is not a giving up of our principles. And for that matter, with Code Pink and Occupy, on the things that we do agree on principle, the principles that we share are traditional American principles. Occupy stands against crony corporatism. As capitalists, so should we. Code Pink stands against perpetual war and invasion of civil liberties. If we believe in first principles and our founding philosophy, then we should be standing in the same spot. There is common ground to be had. And this goes to the second song from Unparalleled Height that I want to play on the show tonight. It's called Bridges to Nowhere. If we can come together, if we can truly find a way to become we the people again, to bridge that gap, then we will not just be building bridges to nowhere.
I'll try to wake him up, so you listen to this.
That was kind of rude. I don't smoke. No, I do, but not much.
Today is a special day. Today we gather as a nation and as an international community to recognize the selfless decision of one of the most influential women of our time. She's been recognized by religious figures and politicians around the world. To us, she's just Rachel. But to the rest of the world, she is the woman who, after having one too many drinks, chose not to drive home buzzed. Here today to honor Rachel is the family whose lives she spared.
Save a life. Don't drive buzzed. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
I was in chronic pain, and my family struggling to make ends meet, food and gas prices going up, even keeping my job was iffy. Then I learned about a new miracle drug made in Washington, D.C., Spenditol. Spenditol is Washington's answer to all the painful problems Americans face. How to borrow $800 billion for a stimulus that didn't create jobs or fix the economy? Spenditol.
Spenditol is not for everyone. Side effects may include a mountain of government debt piled on our kids, a sudden loss of freedoms, higher prices for everything, leaving our kids a lesser America than we had. Ask your doctor or congressman if your conscience is strong enough for Spenditol.
And it's so popular in Washington, we have to import trillions more of it from China. Spenditol makes you feel better now and pushes off the really bad stuff till later, for them to deal with.
Call the White House and Congress. Tell them, stop spending it all.
Daddy's awake. He'll talk and he'll talk until your ears ache. I'm serious, just listen.
Alright, well, thank you, Aiden. That's the last time I leave you alone with the microphone, I think. Alright, and welcome back to the Sons of Liberty show for the final segment here. Yes, that was my daughter, Aiden. I had her help me with putting together some sweepers for the show. The old ones were getting a bit played, pun intended, I suppose. Anyway, so welcome back to the Sons of Liberty show. Final segment here is going to be a fairly short segment because I do have to be up at 4:30 in the morning for work after all, but that's the problem with doing the show on a Sunday night instead of a Saturday night. But nonetheless, I have a few more things to get into on the show. Again, bridging the gap, I think, is the next step, and Rand Paul's filibuster provided us some of the ammunition that we need and some of the intellectual basis that we need to start bridging the gap. There are areas of commonality that must be explored and exploited and carried into fruition. And before I go further with that, again, I hope you enjoyed the song there, Bridges to Nowhere, by Unparalleled Height, a fantastic band out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You know, some of the listeners I know, heavier music may not be your cup of tea. I am a lifelong metalhead since I was first exposed to Black Sabbath at the age of 7, and I've gone on from there through Metallica, Megadeth, Pantera, on down the line. So the music in my shows is sort of a tribute to the fantastic metal bands that I grew up with and new bands as I discover them. And Unparalleled Height is one of those bands right now that's near the top of my list, along with Solution 45, Scar Symmetry, a couple other bands out there that I truly enjoy. But Unparalleled Height right now is vying for a chance to be on Warped Tour, the Vans Warped Tour 2014. And you can go to battleofthebands.com, look for Unparalleled Height. You can vote for them every day. If you like their music as much as I do, you'll do exactly that. I voted for them yesterday and today, and plan to continue doing so throughout the week until the and throughout the duration of the contest. I think they definitely deserve the exposure that the Vans Warped Tour would bring to them. Right now they're an unsigned band out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and having purchased their EP, their 5-song EP from iTunes, I cannot understand for the life of me why someone hasn't snatched them up yet. But they're phenomenal. They're hardworking guys, and they have a new single coming out later this month as well. I can't wait to hear that. So again, Unparalleled Height, fantastic band. Now, getting into this last short little segment here of the show, some of the common ground, I think, that we can find is summed up pretty well, I think, in the mission statement of the Trenches. It's thetrenches.us. I write for them. I've gotten I can't even remember how many pieces I've written there so far, but it's a fantastic organization. The team that we've assembled, I think, is a good one, and the objective, more importantly, is, I think, the direction that we need to be pushing in as a country. And I will read the mission objective of the Trenches.us here, and see if you can find whether you align with the left, the right, Anonymous, Code Pink, Occupy, Tea Party, whatever. See if you can find points of agreement here. I think no matter where your affiliations lie, you can find something in this mission objective to agree with. Those who fight in the trenches aren't interested in or motivated by promises of glory, reward for party loyalty, or the accolades of our peers. We are here to survive. We are here to ensure America's survival. We believe in the freedoms guaranteed by the United States Constitution. We believe what most media outlets have forgotten, that freedom of speech and a free press need not kowtow to the whims of the government or the fads of society. We believe that truth will out, even if truth is unpopular or uncomfortable. We believe in the free market's proven ability to provide for its participants, to be regulated by the needs of the buyer, and to create prosperity for the nation that dares to embrace it fully. We believe that all elected officials must be held to the same standards of private citizens. We believe that politicians who do not rigorously uphold the freedoms guaranteed in the United States Constitution must be vetted and ousted, no matter which party they claim to represent. We exist to serve the people of the United States, not any personality, including our own. We in the trenches will fight encroaching leftism to the last man. We will call it out wherever it is found, and we will attack it from the ground. We will show no quarter to traitors who lurk within our ranks. If you are brave enough to meet the enemy face to face, this is your unit. So, there's that. Now, that mission objective leads us to call out people on the conservative side who are charlatans, scam artists, fakes, and, to be quite honest, traitors to the cause of liberty. They give conservatism and founding principles a bad name, because when those on the other side of the aisle, playing into the false left-right dichotomy, find people that are, quote, in our ranks, who are scam artists and sleazebags and charlatans, they call them out and use them as a bludgeon to paint the rest of conservatism as being like them. So instead, we choose to find these people, pursue them, expose them, and hopefully expel them from our ranks before the other side can do so. If you do not, I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on, whatever group you affiliate yourself with, if you find people in your ranks that will give you a bad name, that are bad actors, engaging in practices that will harm your cause, you call them out and you expose them and you say, look, I knew about this and I'm pointing it out. Because otherwise, if you know about it and say nothing, you are an accomplice. You are, in effect, giving them aid and comfort. You are an enabler. It was interesting to me to see the people in the Occupy movement calling out the rapists in their ranks, people that were breaking laws in their ranks. People within the Occupy movement were pointing them out and exposing them, and that is as it should be. People within Anonymous do the same thing. When there are bad actors in their ranks, they call them out and say, no, that is not us. Why is it that people who claim to be conservatives don't do the same? They will stand up for and defend to the hilt these charlatans, scam artists, and bad actors. At the trenches, we do not. We call them out and grant them no quarter every time, and that is as it should be. The reason we do this is so that our cause will not be tainted by these bad actors, so that we can continue in pressing our cause without the distraction or without the stigma of these people being attached to it by those who would not necessarily join in our cause. What is our cause? Again, breaking the chain of neoconservatism, progressivism, and Marcusean repressive tolerance, which has manifested itself in tolerance for its own sake and political correctness over the last 60 years. Calling out progressivism, which has engaged through Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and all of their acolytes and adherents down the line, is manifested in democracy projects around the world and welfare statism all around the world, supporting a dependency cycle in every foreign nation on the globe at the expense of American taxpayers. Those are the things that we call out and oppose, and we seek to break those chains. We also seek to bridge the gap, to find matters of principle that we can stand on, shoulder to shoulder, with people that we might not always agree with. Code Pink, Occupy, Anonymous, Blue Dog Democrats, fiscal conservative Democrats. All of these people we can find common ground with and stand shoulder to shoulder, fighting for those principles. My objective, and hopefully my legacy, will be the Coolidge Project, seeking to promote and reestablish federalism. What is federalism? Well, it's enshrined in our founding documents. It's enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Federalist Papers. Limited government, specific roles and powers that are given to the federal government, with everything else reserved to the states, the localities, and the people. Reinstituting federalism will have the effect of bringing the massive bureaucratic state to heel, bringing them down to our level, where our individual voices might perhaps have an effect that they do not have now. The people inside of the 495 Beltway, in that godforsaken swamp we call our nation's capital, do not have our best interests at heart, only their own. They do not have the interests of the 50 states at heart, only the interests of the federal government, things that will suit their pocketbook and play to the perpetuation of their power. The Coolidge Project. The Coolidge Project is right now catching fire in 16 states across the United States. This year, our primary focus is in Virginia and New Jersey, which have elections for their respective houses of delegates in November. In Virginia so far, we have fielded 12 candidates and have at least 6 more in the wings to challenge sitting members of the House of Delegates. I am in the process of writing up a candidate pledge for the Coolidge Project. Anyone who wants the support of the Coolidge Project in gaining petition signatures for ballot access will have to adhere to this pledge and sign on to it. The pledge, as a rough draft right now, includes a vow to explain and promote Federalist principles, to educate colleagues, constituents, and party power players on what our governmental structure was truly designed to be and how we can return to it. A vow to lead by example by voting against any and all legislation that would cede further state powers, discretion, or oversight to the federal government. Vote against any and all legislation which imposes federal mandates upon their state in return for federal monies which cannot be distributed save for first being confiscated from their constituents. Introduce and sponsor bills that will question and curtail federal overreach into affairs and powers implicitly left to the states by the U.S. Constitution. And there are a couple other things as well, but in return for taking that vow and signing that pledge, Coolidge Project candidates will receive the support of members of the Coolidge Project. What does that support entail? Helping to gather petition signatures for ballot access for that candidate, and furthermore, being emissaries for the idea of federalism around that district on behalf of the candidate. Once again, personalities take last place. Principle is paramount in all of these struggles that we are going to have to engage in. Principle is paramount. So, these members of the Coolidge Project, as emissaries of the Coolidge Project candidate, will not be promoting the candidate per se. They will be promoting Federalist principles. And once again, federalism, as enshrined in our Constitution, is, well, I mean, it's part of our founding philosophy. There's a balancing act involved in federalism, which is part of the beauty of the structure of federalism as well, to temper the imminent danger posed to the Republic by direct democracy, while allowing for the most plenary powers of self-government to be left in the hands of the individual. This is why subsidiarity is so vital to federalism, the Republican form of government, and the very rule of law. Separation of powers is not just a doctrine enshrined in our federal Constitution, but also in those of the states. And it doesn't stop there. Every county, city, township, hamlet, and even private business across the nation has some level of separation doctrine written into its charter. Why? Because it works. In every one of those institutions, duties, responsibilities, functions, and specific powers are vested in specific agents to be performed by that person alone. There is a non-delegation doctrine as well, and that is simply to say that that person who is entrusted with those functions cannot delegate those functions to others. Overall accountability explicitly requires a clear delineation of responsibilities. The Constitution did this. It gave a clear delineation of responsibilities to the federal government. These are the things you are allowed to do. And that was the end of it. Everything else was reserved to the states and the people. That is federalism. When powers are compartmentalized in this fashion, it's much easier to identify who is truly culpable when those functions are not performed, or when they are performed shoddily, or dangerously, or unethically, or even, God forbid, criminally. It follows that the more of these compartments a governing body contains, the more vigilant the overseers must be. And there also have to be greater numbers of overseers, because there are more compartments and more people heading those compartments or departments. The rise of the administrative state since the institution of the 17th Amendment has been a problem, has been a thorn in the side of those seeking to maintain and or restore federalism. The indoctrination of the people simultaneously to look to the federal government as savior and benefactor in nearly every instance. Because of that, because of the administrative state and the indoctrination, to look to federal government first, not local or state, but federal, that vigilance broke down and the numbers of watchmen dwindled. Why? Well, basically because of an entirely justified sense of futility. There are so many people to watch, and there are so many who would be watchmen who now look to the federal government first, rather than looking to curtail the federal government or keep it confined within the box that the founders placed it in with the Constitution. Now, if you need proof that this vigilance and the numbers of watchmen have dwindled, consider this. 15 million more votes were cast for American Idol than for President of the United States just in 2012. Now, that's something that is thrown out there quite a bit. Oh, look at it. All these people are so concerned with American Idol that they don't even pay attention to politics anymore. It's more than that. It's not about politics, it's about philosophy. The numbers of voters really don't matter. It's the philosophy. It's the understanding of what our Constitution did, what our Constitution was supposed to do to limit the federal government. That founding philosophy has been ignored, which leads to apathy on the part of the American people. And it's justified. That apathy is justified. There's a sense of futility that, why should I care? Because it doesn't matter. I believe we're in worse shape than that on a local level. Try this. Tomorrow, ask a coworker if they can give you the first and last name of 3 members of your state's legislature, House or Senate, or any combination thereof. Beggars can't be picky after all. And brace yourself for the sinking feeling that you'll most likely experience upon hearing their non-answer answer. When people do not vote in federal elections, and vote even less in local elections, that illustrates the point that they are not paying attention even to their local politics. Sure, you show up every 4 years and vote for president. What's happening in your state in the meantime? There's a powerful phrase that was written into the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. I think just in that phrase lies every remedy we need to reinstate federalism, withdrawing our consent by perfectly legal means. And that's essentially what the Coolidge Project is about. Gaining enough people in a state legislature, a 50% plus one majority of Federalists in both state houses, and an amenable governor, then the real fun can begin. If we have one state, just one state, that passes legislation to turn down every penny of federal Medicaid money, just that one program, how much time do you think the national media would devote to that story? Holy crap, there's a state out there that is telling the federal government to mind their own business and keep their money, which, of course, is confiscated from the taxpayers of that state. But how much time would the national media devote? They would probably spend days blasting the awful, evil, no good, dirty, rotten scoundrel of a governor that actually signed that into law, right? Think back to SB 1070 in Arizona, right-to-work legislation in New Hampshire, Michigan, and Ohio, public sector union reforms in Wisconsin and New Jersey. There was uproar from the national media for days over those things. Imagine a state telling the federal government, we got this, mind your own. Massive media coverage. And, better still, imagine the domino effect across dozens of states after watching this rogue state closely the following fiscal year and realizing, by George, they really do got this. Every state with even a slight majority of limited government legislators will be clamoring to claim the status and news exposure of second place. The domino effect kicks in. Despite the best efforts of power-mad federal agencies and lawmakers, states must still compete for intellectual and monetary capital, which can only be generated by entrepreneurs. Unlike federal elected officials and bureaucrats, these entrepreneurs' job prospects are not limited to the realm of public service. In other words, these entrepreneurs are not limited geographically. Would you relocate to a state that shows a willingness or even eagerness to keep federal busybodies out of the lives of its citizens? You're damn right you would. And millions would join you in that mass exodus. That is what the Coolidge Project is about. That is what I'm hoping will be the little legacy that I can leave here. And the cool thing about it is that this idea of federalism can bridge the gap. It's not, as the Unparalleled Heights song there, it's not a bridge to nowhere. This is a bridge that we can actually build across that gap to bring people on all sides together. Because if there's one thing that Rand Paul's filibuster pointed out, it's that massive numbers of the American people are beginning to realize the danger posed by a huge, unrestrained federal government. If you have a federal government that refuses to answer a question of whether or not they can kill you, then what avenue, what area of intervention in your life is closed to a government that large? That is the big picture from Rand Paul's filibuster last week. We can use that argument that he made just about drones, and that's why the neocons are so paranoid. That's why they're so upset about this, because they understand that this one argument was not just about drones. Well, nope, the government hasn't used any drones to kill people on American soil, so this is a non-issue. It's just political grandstanding. That's what they want you to believe. That's what some of the progressives want you to believe. That's what some of the PC repressive tolerance folks want you to believe. That this was just about drones, something that hasn't happened on American soil, so it's a non-issue. It's a moot point. Rand Paul was just engaging in political gamesmanship, political theater. It's something that doesn't even matter because it hasn't happened and isn't going to. That's the thing, though. There's a bigger picture involved here. It's not just about drones. It's about the fact that if you have a federal government that refuses to say they cannot kill an American citizen, then that federal government must also refuse to delineate any limits on their power over you, economically, geographically, in the realm of any aspect of your daily life. If they can take your life, your very life, if they refuse to admit that they are barred from taking your life, then they also refuse to admit that they are barred from taking your property. They are also in the position where they have to refuse to admit that they can take your family, your money, your job, anything. Isn't life one of those first inalienable rights outlined in the Declaration of Independence? Didn't Thomas Jefferson place life at the beginning of that list? Because without life, you cannot have liberty. You cannot have the pursuit of happiness. You cannot have property. You cannot have a family. You cannot have a job. You cannot have a freaking picnic on a Sunday afternoon. If your government tells you that they have the right or the ability or the capacity or the justifiable reason to take your life, there's nothing left that they can't take. That is the bigger picture. And that is where we have the foot in the door to find more common ground, to make that case to everyone we encounter. That is the long-term, lasting impact of Rand Paul's filibuster. That is the argument that we need to apply to every single issue that comes up in politics and in debating policy and in debating philosophy and principles with everyone we encounter, no matter what their paradigm is, no matter how much they've been brainwashed, no matter how much they've been indoctrinated by the progressives or the Marcusians or the neoconservatives. That is our argument. And that is why the people attacking Rand Paul and the others who stood with him, that's why they are so scared. They are afraid to death of that legacy. Now, closing out the show here, another song from Unparalleled Height, conveniently enough titled Legacy. So, again, you can find Unparalleled Height on battleofthebands.com. Vote for them early and often if you like the music. I do, and I will be voting for them. You can also find them on Twitter, UPH_official. I wanted to get that in there before the end of the show. Great band, great guys. Appreciate them giving me permission to use the music on the show tonight. Love it. I've been jamming here during the breaks, listening to this stuff. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening to the show. Hopefully, I will be back next week with a little bit more on these topics and what the long-term impact is, and hopefully a little bit more news on the Coolidge Project after a couple of conference calls and furious emails going back and forth all week. But in the meantime, here's Unparalleled Height with Legacy, and I will see you back here on the Sons of Liberty show next week. Until then, remember, the blessings of liberty are nowhere near as secure as they once were, but the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Remain vigilant and remain safe throughout this coming week, knowing that the battle is joined. You are not alone, and we are winning. It is, after all, the legacy of our founders, and hopefully our legacy. Good night.
What a shame to say I'm dead.